I'm going to tell you two things that I wouldn't have believed when I was 13 years old. And the first is that you are going to save the forest, and you are going to do that with measurements and data-driven markets. The second thing is that I would be standing here, or that I am standing here, talking to you about measurements and data-driven markets. That when I was 13, that was absolutely not the plan. I was going to be working in the woods. It was going to be amazing. I was going to be there. And I bring up the age 13 because that's when I decided that I wanted to be a forester. Before that, I wanted to study bugs. I think that was first grade, and then second grade was just animals. Then third, on and on, reptiles, rocks. I wanted to be a geologist for a little while, and then I met a forester. And I found out that they work with insects, they work with trees, and they work with all of the things that I loved so much, rocks, reptiles, the whole thing. They worked with the entire system. I was hooked. I loved it. And so I started my journey down the path of becoming a forester. And along the way, I came to find that forestry is just as much about people as it is about trees and streams and owls, fire, lumber, all of those things. And so when we talk about saving the forest, what we're talking about is a forest that provides all of these things. A forest that works for everyone. Because balancing all of these things across the landscape is one of the greatest challenges of our generation. So as you go through forestry, as I did, I found that forest management could kind of be boiled down to three basic questions. One, what is the state of the forest that we have today? Two, what forest do we want in the future? And three, what's the best way to get there? And I was laser focused on number 2 and number 3. I thought that's where the action was. And that was great until I slammed into a pretty large problem. And everything kind of came grinding to a halt. And for me, that happened as I was starting grad school. I had this project in Armenia, of all places. It's this small country in the Caucasus. It's a beautiful place. And out there, there were about 100 villages that all had these small patches of forest. And they wanted to manage them for a lot of the things that you see up there. They wanted fuel wood to heat their homes. They wanted to cut some timber, make some revenue, develop. And they wanted help defining what was possible and getting a path to get there. And I was all about it. I was so excited to help and work on that project. But when I got out there, I found out that they didn't know anything really about the structure and composition of their forest. They didn't have a starting point. And so that was my problem. You see, you can't answer a question like, what's the impact on this bird species if we cut a little bit more fuel wood this year, if you don't know your starting point. And so without that, I was kind of stuck. And so that's how this happened. I started trying to solve my own problem and got neck deep in satellite imagery and statistics, and I was not out in the woods. But this is, it's not a sad story. This is a story about you, remember, and how you are going to save the forest with measurements and data-driven markets. And good news, it worked. What you're looking at here is Basemap. This is the first high-resolution inventory of the continental United States. Behind it are a whole bunch of smart people that I'm lucky to have gotten to work with, terabytes of satellite data, massive amounts of compute power, and the plot data set collected by the U.S. Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis Group. It's a long word, but it's important to give credit. They did great work. But really what you're looking at here is a map of trees per acre across the continental U.S. at a 50-foot resolution, so about the size of like a school bus. And for each one of those cells across the landscape, we have a list of trees that includes the species and diameter. And that's pretty amazing. We haven't had data like that before, that kind of resolution. And so it opens up all sorts of possibilities, of new questions that we can ask and answer, like where is the best place to act to reduce wildfire risk in California? And that's something we're working on right now. So here we go. This is part of the solution. This is the first half of how you're going to save the forest, but it is not the entire thing, because this by itself doesn't answer those last two questions. It doesn't help us define exactly what we want. It doesn't tell us exactly how to get there. Okay, so we've got that. We've got high resolution measurements. How are we going to manage the forest? Well, the truth is that everyone, me, you, all of us, we're all forest managers, because we are all consumers. And everything that we consume, every paper cup, every stick of wood, every house, everything that's around us comes from things that were either grown or mined. So we affect the forest, we manage the forest with every single purchase that we make, every single thing that we consume. And so the story behind that matters. And the processes, the markets that bring those products to us, translate to the acres that grow the trees, that make the wood that we use, and the trees that make wildlife habitat as well. So markets are an important thing, but while we can buy a 2x4, for example, at Home Depot, and when we do that, we know that we're getting the best price on it, right? Could have gone somewhere else, but Home Depot had the best price, because the market motivates efficiency at every link in the chain that brings that 2x4 to you. From the trees, to the mill, to Home Depot, to you. Which is incredible. It's an amazing thing, actually. And fantastic that we can buy wood because we use it. But what happens if we all decide that we want more owl habitat in this world? Where's the market for that? Why can't we just buy some owl habitat? Well, the difference is that with a 2x4, you can go and you can put your money on the table and you can pick up the 2x4 that you just bought, and you can know that you got what you paid for. You can measure it and assess it and know that it's good enough for you. But that's not the case with something like owl habitat or elk habitat or carbon sequestration. It's all happening somewhere else. So it's kind of like you want to ship your friend a package that lives 3 states away, and you have no way of confirming or validating that they actually got it. You pay, you ship it, maybe they got it, maybe they didn't. It's not that satisfying. And that's the problem. But that's where those measurements come in. Those measurements provide a means of validating what's happening on the landscape at high resolution. So it's not just about telling us what the state of the forest is, or where we can go to have the best effect or least cost effect to increase something like owl habitat. It's there to help us recognize that the difference that we paid for on the landscape actually happened. So in 2 years, you are going to be able to buy owl habitat and elk habitat just as easily as you can buy a 2x4, which is pretty exciting. We're pretty pumped about it. But the thing is, most of you probably aren't in the market for elk habitat. You're not going to hit that store or buy that stock. But the good news is that all of those things that we care so much about, those intangible things about the forest, are going to be baked into the products that you do buy. So for this paper cup, I can know that it came from a path that not only was efficient in the way that the wood was purchased and processed, but also that it came through a pathway that didn't negatively impact the things that we collectively care about also on the landscape, but that don't currently have a market, because markets attend to what is measured and ignore what is not. By measuring it, we have the ability to get the impact that we want collectively. And that's why you see companies like Microsoft and IKEA, McDonald's making the sustainability commitments that they are. because people want to know the full impact of the products that they're buying. Okay, so we have these measurements, we have markets, we're ready to roll, right? Well, how does this actually work on an acre? This is 1 acre in Northern California. And on that 1 acre, there are plenty of trees that could be cut for 2x4s. There's carbon that's sequestered, there's some owl habitat, and all of those things are in a proportion that changes naturally through time. And so if we want to incentivize this owner, the owner of this property, to do something differently, we have to pay them. We have to motivate them to change their behavior. And normally, right now, the only ways to do that are to either buy the acre and do it ourselves, or to pay them to cut wood, or to cut trees, lots of them, or a few of them, thinning. So the future instead is to make this landowner an offer. We want there to be more owl habitat, and on the margin, it would be very inexpensive for this person to allow their forest to grow just a little bit more. Maybe they typically would have cut, but we're going to pay them just a little bit. They're not losing the value of the timber. They can always cut that in the future, next year, but this year we want them just to marginally increase the owl habitat or retain it. Same with carbon. We're going to rent that on this acre, year over year. And by doing so, balancing that across the acres, we're going to achieve greater impact than otherwise possible. So take a look at this map on the left. That is a little subset of a county in western Pennsylvania. And that's what a lot of the US looks like. Lots of small parcels with little patches of forest here and there. The reason these data-driven markets work is that they provide information and the ability to make offers to all of these people. For all of these people to access these markets and to be paid for making changes on the landscape. Because when information is inexpensive, more people or smaller landowners can access it, whereas traditionally it's only the largest landowners that are able to afford collecting information and putting these types of products on a market. And the picture on the right is one landowner. Because this isn't just a theory, this is something we're putting in practice this year. We're working with Microsoft to pay landowners to effectively rent carbon on the landscape. We are paying them to defer harvest by 1 year. We use the measurements that we have to assess the risk of harvest. We assess the amount of stumpage that they have and how that relates to the amount of carbon on their property in particular. We automatically generate an offer for every single person on that landscape, and it's non-binding. It's payment on delivery. We're paying for the value of what they provide. So at the close of that 1 year, if they have additional carbon, if they didn't harvest, then they're paid. And by doing so, by renting across the landscape, we're able to more flexibly allocate money to the acres that have the potential for the greatest impact. Because in this case, this is just like renting 20 apartments is cheaper than buying one. So again, much more flexible, much more able to generate impact across the acre today. So we have the forests we have today. We can't change that, but we can change the future. And when we got started, I told you that you are going to save the forest, and you're going to do it with measurements and markets. And that sounds heroic, saving the forest. At least that's how it sounded to me when I was little and wanted to save the forest. Really, it's going to be all the little decisions that you make in your everyday life. This cup or that. And we're going to be able to use those markets to translate our social or societal values onto the acres more effectively than we can when there's only a market for timber. Thank you.